You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, and this is a crossover edition also with Locked On Texas Tech, and Chris Level joins us, who is the host of Locked On Texas Tech, and a lot to break down on this show, but a quick reminder, thank you to all of you on both of these shows for making it your first listen today. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us here on the podcasts as well. But Chris, how are you, sir? Thanks for taking the time to join us.
I'm doing good, man. Looking for the old first trip up to Provo. I think these two schools have only played one time before, back in the 40s?
Yep, the 40s.
In front of 7,000 people.
In Lubbock, of all places.
That's right.
It was a 21-20 final. So crazy stuff. I'll just say this also. We are recording this on a Wednesday, funny enough, Chris, if I'm not mistaken. So it's Wednesday when we're recording this. Today, speaking of Wednesday, October 18th, I believe is actually the 82-year anniversary or something like that of that game. So crazy stuff.
And here we are celebrating. I mean, as one does on an 82 game anniversary, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, that's right.
So I wanted to ask you this, obviously, with Texas Tech and BYU being new members of the Big 12, this is kind of the one opponent, it feels like, for BYU fans that they are seemingly wholly unfamiliar with, just because it's been literally decades since they have played one another. What's the feeling of Texas Tech with these newcomers coming into the conference, and obviously more coming in next year as well?
And I will tell you, I think Texas Tech and BYU are somewhat kindred spirits in that the one link I can certainly give you is the Mike Leach link. Yeah. I know he spent a lot of time there in Provo, and obviously spent a lot of time in Lubbock. So we kind of can, be that way with each other. I think that honestly, I think that the Texas Tech fans are really excited about the new additions, not just the ones that have entered the league this year, BYU included, but even the ones that are on the way into the league next year. Because, Jake, it wasn't but 2 years ago when you're sitting here in August and September and you're going, I don't know what the future holds here, folks. And you're kind of this 8-member league, and Texas and Oklahoma are headed elsewhere, and you're not real sure who's going to lead your league, what a TV deal looks like. Do you expand? If so, with whom? And you look up about 18 to 24 months later, whatever it is, and you're in a stable, viable league. The money seems pretty good for everybody. It's not the best. It never was going to be the best. Sure. You are led by a guy that's really thinking outside the box and trying to push the envelope and Brett Yormark. So I'm here for it, man. And I tell you, I think the regionality of what they have put together makes a lot of sense, because I get some of the other additions to some of the other leagues. I understand it and grasp it. I just think it's kind of dumb when you're going from West Coast all the way to East Coast in a lot of these things, because football is one thing, but there's a lot more that goes through this or goes into this. And so I liked what the Big 12 was able to do, and they were able to stay somewhat regional and all that stuff. So, man, I'm here for it, man.
Now, obviously, this game Saturday with Texas Tech in particular, we all know that the quarterbacks seem to drive this league and also drive college football in general. Now, Tyler Shuck is out. There's been some question about Baron Morton and his availability in this game, but Jake Strong could be in line to get his first career start. What do you make of what quarterback or quarterbacks could play for the Red Raiders against the Cougars?
Well, and I'll just say this: the best thing about Jake Strong is his first name, right?
Sure. Yeah. I was holding on to that as a joke for later in the show. Hey,
just jumped into it. No, you potentially could be starting, because I think if Barron plays, I don't think he's going to be 100%. He really hasn't been 100%. I think, he got dinged up when he came into the game in Morgantown when Shuck went down and broke his leg. When Barron came in, I think he took a hit on the shoulder. It really hasn't been right. He hadn't practiced a ton. And so even if he does play, he's not exactly 100%. So one of two things will happen. Either you're going to deal with a quarterback that is a bit compromised, or you're going to deal with a true freshman that make it his first start. But this is kind of, unfortunately, what Texas Tech has had to deal with for what feels like the last decade. I mean, Joey and the offensive coordinator, Zach Kittley, they're basically, if Jake were to start, they would have had to have started through a season and a half here. They would have basically had to have started 4 different quarterbacks in conference games, 4 different people. And that's just a difficult way to try to win and sustain success and build on success, get into a rhythm, figure out, play. I mean, all the stuff that goes with trying to game plan and call plays and figure out what we're good at and all that. It's difficult when you're having to kind of tweak and morph it and all those things. So yeah, it's been a concern, and it's just not the way you can win football games when you're dealing with quarterback issues, especially if you're down to your third string guy. I don't care what level you're at, but you'll try and you'll do the best you can with it. And if that's the case, Barron, when healthy, I think is a really good quarterback. The problem is just that he hasn't been that since he's been able to come in and play this year, other than a handful of series when he came in Morgantown.
Now, obviously, a quarterback's best friend when it comes to having that revolving door, as you kind of mentioned with quarterbacks, having a strong running back. And Taj Brooks is that. If not, he may be the best, if not one of the best in the conference. What have been your impressions of him so far this year?
He split carries the last couple of years. It feels like he's been here for forever. He's one of these guys. I'm sure that the mainstay, the schools that have been in the league for a while, they're like, dude, still here? It's like he's been here for 6 years. But yes, he's still here and all that. I don't think anybody was expecting what we're seeing now. I think that he's more than capable. I think that it's just that in the last 20 plus years around here, we mentioned Mike Leach, you've had an identity of throwing the ball all over the field. And your offensive line is a bit slower to develop than I think they'd hoped. Plus, you've got the quarterback issues that we've talked about. And so that's led to a lot more running the football. And guess what? It's been working, and it's worked well. The fans around here want them to hand it to Taj even more than they're doing so. And he's got the 6th most carries in the country. But he is a really good back. We're not talking like the Bijan Robinson in the Big 12 last year at University of Texas. Like, Taj is not going to be a threat to take it and score every time he touches it. However, elite level pass pro guy, going to catch it. You're not going to hardly get him for any kind of negative play. He's really good after initial contact. And he kind of gets those in between the tackles, grinded out yards. And they've been working on a variety of different schemes and looks to get him the ball. I think, Zach Kittley even went to go learn from the Dolphins and the running backs coach, Kenny Perry. They went to go watch the Dolphins and the 49ers in the spring to kind of get some ideas on concepts of how to line guys up and be able to run the ball in different ways. But I don't think anybody envisioned like handing it to Taj 20 to 30 times a game like they've been doing, but that's what's happening and it's working.
Last thing for me, just from my perspective, looking at Texas Tech, is the defense for years. And I'm speaking from my years of watching college football under Mike Leach. Seemed like defense was kind of an afterthought for Texas Tech. And with the new staff in charge here, though, it seems like they've had a resurgence on defense. Is this defense capable of keeping them in each game this year, or has it been a struggle?
Jake, I think they turned a corner around here when Matt Wells was here, and the defensive coordinator's name is Key Patterson. A lot of the transfer guys that came in that are still on this team now came in and really kind of turned. They made defense matter around here, because you're right, it's a very fair criticism. I mean, it's well documented. Pat Mahomes was here, didn't win a lot of games because he couldn't score every time he had the ball. I mean, and that's in some ways what you were asking. I mean, they had Pat Mahomes, Jakeem Grant, DeAndre Washington, who was in the NFL for a bit of a time, Jason Morrow, who was like an early draft pick as a tight end, big-time offensive lineman. Anyway, but they just couldn't get anybody stopped. And so I think around here they have really done a good job of, I think, turning the tide there. And I think Tim DeRuyter's done a really good job. And then you have a guy like Tyree Wilson who was drafted in the top 10 last year. A couple years before that, you have a first rounder that goes linebacker that goes to the Seahawks, and Jordan Brooks. So they've had legit playmakers here. And go look at what Jordan Brooks is doing on that side. But so with all that being said, this is where the age is on this team. There's a lot of sixth-year guys on that side of the ball. They're 2D tackles, they're corners, one of the safeties. There's a lot of experience and age on that side of the ball, I think, on that defense, and I think they're doing some good things. But they should be good enough. Like, what's funny is you asked me this last week. They kind of let you down a little bit. Now, I think they had no idea that Avery Johnson was going to come off the bench and get handed the reins, and they're going to see this QB run game over and over and over again. I just don't think they were necessarily ready to see that. But the 2 weeks prior, they had been really good. And I think that even against Oregon, they were pretty good. Against West Virginia, they were pretty good. But it just it wasn't great last weekend, especially in the second half. Your young quarterback, obviously had something to do with that. But there's some good defensive players here, and I'm really curious how this game within the game goes on Saturday night, because I know BYU's been struggling a little bit on offense, and we'll kind of see. Because if you're Texas Tech defense, you're going to have to play and elevate a little bit just to protect either young or a dinged up quarterback, either way, and that's kind of be something that we certainly pay attention to.
Well, just like Texas Tech has got some questions, BYU's got them. Crystal Peppermint with some questions coming up next on this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech. Before we do that, let's talk about our friends over at PrizePicks. Chris, have you had a chance to give PrizePicks a shot yet?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really, really fun thing. What I love about it, because I've played daily fantasy before, and what I hated was the fact that you had to play against other people. That's the problem, is you don't know who you're going up against. That's what about PrizePicks is they've taken that all out of the equation and made it that simple for you guys, and they just make it so you compete you against the numbers. You pick between 2 and 6 players on stat projections, pick over or under those numbers, and that's all you got to do to win, my friends. You can win up to 25 times your own money this football season with our friends at PrizePicks. You can test your skills on PrizePicks with the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. You have the skills. You can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. You really can make this as simple as you want it to be, my friend. You can make your picks and make your selections, lock them in less than 60 seconds. The best part is that you have a reboot entry for you if your player, even if one of your players gets hurt and gets injured for NFL and college football top 25 games. If you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with this injury insurance policy. So give it a shot, my friends. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use the promo code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege, and use the promo code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. And check it out, my friends. It's all courtesy of PrizePicks. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech your first listen of the day. Hope you guys are all having a great day whenever you hear this. All right, Chris, so I just mentioned there are questions about Texas Tech. From the Red Raider perspective, what are you guys looking at, speaking of BYU, trying to get to know the Cougars?
Yeah, Jake, I think one of the questions I would have for you, what were expectations coming into the Big 12, and did the fan base, did they think, this is not going to be that big a deal? We kind of play a tough schedule every year, or are they seeing kind of as they look at it, this is a bit, you take me through kind of how people there have viewed coming into the Big 12, and now that you're kind of getting it week to week here.
I think most people, when the season started, kind of looked at this and said, okay, you know what? This is a leap we've never taken before. BYU has always hoped to have been at the Power 5 level and be a part of a conference like the Big 12, literally for decades. I can remember as a kid, I'm going to remember in the 1990s when Lavelle Edwards was doing his thing and they went to the Cotton Bowl in 97. People were saying, okay, they need to take the next step. They need to jump to what at that time was the Pac-10 or jump into the Big 12 way back then. But it's taken decades to get to this point. Now, the Cougars, they're 4-2 on the season, but they have scraped through a lot of this first half of the season by the skin of their teeth. And I think Cougar fans coming into the season would have been happy with a 6-6 record and a bowl eligible season. But when you go out in the first half of the season and you win 4 games, you're ahead of the curve. So I think expectations have been heightened just a little bit. I think some people out there may be still thinking if BYU can get on a roll, they may be able to reach 7 or 8 wins. But I think most people are just like, you know what? Year one, get to a bowl game, and I think all will be good.
I'm also curious about Coach Sataki because one, Joey McGuire is a big fan. I think there's a lot of mutual respect there. I think this is somebody that Coach McGuire has known for a long time. I know it's funny because I think the running backs coach was the associate head coach, Kenny Perry. He's actually coached and played at BYU or against BYU. Tim DeRuyter has played and coached in Provo as well against the Cougars and all those things. But how do because being there 8 years, Coach Sataki's been there. It's a long time and a long tenure. People pleased with him and kind of the general, because he's 60-36 overall. I mean, pretty nice record and some double-digit win seasons there. I just don't know what the expectations are. I'm curious what his approval rating is right now.
It's quite high. He is in no danger of going anywhere. This is a guy, and you talk about it. He is a BYU guy through and through. Kalani grew up a BYU fan, had the good fortune to play college football for Lavelle Edwards, and he always dreamed of coming back to his alma mater and coaching here. That's the thing. His entire life, he's always wanted to be a part of BYU in every facet. He's been lucky enough to do that. He had a little bit of a slow start to his career, to his run at BYU. That second year, they went 4-9, and it's quite literally the worst season in the last 50 years of BYU football. And there were some BYU fans saying, is he in over his head? Is he able to figure this out? To his credit, he made some changes on his staff at that time, got the ship righted once again. This past season, speaking of 2022, he had defensive struggles, and he had to make some changes on his staff once again. And it's obviously early on with only 6 games with that new defensive staff intact, but it seems like the early returns on that are positive. So he's a guy that BYU fans trust to make the decisions that he needs to make sure that BYU's in a good position. I think they also understand, it's not going to be an overnight success in the Big 12 here. It's going to take some time to build and become a hopeful Big 12 contender. But I think Cougar fans trust what Kalani's doing. He has ingratiated himself to the fan base. He talks often of how grateful he is for BYU fans and their ability to travel literally across the country to watch the Cougars play. So this is a guy who gets what it's all about. He knows what BYU struggles are with regards to their honor code, the church affiliation, the academic requirements to get guys into school. He embraces all of it. And that's one thing I think that BYU fans are happy about. And like I said, he's in no danger of leaving anytime soon unless he decides to leave of his own volition.
Yeah, and I love that news. I think he's a breath of fresh air and kind of a player's coach is the way from afar is the way. And I've talked to Joey about him and huge fan. So there'll be a lot of mutual respect there between the two head coaches Saturday night. Take me through, because when I think of BYU, I think elite quarterbacks from in the past. Yeah. Detmer, Robbie Bosco, Taysom Hill, Zach Wilson, Jim McMahon, on and on it goes. I remember watching them all. But the running game is something that hasn't gotten on track to help out your current quarterback. It was the running game thought to be like, man, this, because it's just they just seemingly can't get that on track. Was this expected, or because I'm sure this is part of some of the struggles that have been going on this year?
Yeah, they've had a good run of running backs. Funny enough, the running back always would take the backseat to the quarterback at BYU, because you mentioned they go back 4 or 5 decades of having elite quarterback play. But they've had Tyler Algier, who's now at the Atlanta Falcons. They have Jamal Williams before him, who's now at the New Orleans Saints. So obviously he was with the Lions and the Packers before that. 2 very all-time caliber quarterbacks for BYU. And this year they brought in a guy by the name of Aiden Robbins, who was a 1,000-yard rusher a season ago at UNLV. And they were expecting him to come in and really kind of lead this rushing attack. Well, he got dinged up in camp, and they kind of kept it hush-hush. And he was very ineffective the first 2 games of the year, and he's been on the shelf since then. They have a young running back, a 4-star talent out of El Paso, Texas, by the name of L.J. Martin, who has stepped in and has done it pretty good, all things considered. He is he's an 18-year-old who was playing high school football this time last year.
And L.J. Martin was originally committed to Texas Tech.
I was going to bring that up. He went from Tech to commit to Stanford.
Yeah, there you go. That's exactly right. Yeah, so Tech fans are very familiar with LJ.
Yeah, and he's been very good so far. The problem has been they revamped this offensive line after losing 4 of their regular 6. They had like 6 guys last year who were starting caliber linemen, and 4 of them moved on after last season. So they hit the transfer portal to retool that. The problem is through 6 games, there's been seemingly no like gelling of that unit. They've been shuffling in terms of guys in and out of the lineup on that offensive line. What was thought to be maybe one of the chief strengths for BYU's offense, that O-line, has been frankly a disappointment so far this year, and it's caused a lot of the issues. They've had inability to really open big holes for the running backs. At times, the running backs themselves have misread things, LJ Martin included in that mix. So yeah, the running game was expected to be better than it has been, but it's just not been able to get untracked this season.
Yeah, and take me through Slovis real quick, because everybody's familiar with him. He's, I think, USC, then I think Pitt, and then now BYU. He's very experienced. I mean, Tim DeRuyter, the defensive coordinator, he was like, "Yeah, I coached against him when I was at Cal, and he was at USC. That was back in 2019, which feels like an eternity." But has he been what people had hoped? Has he been not quite as good, much better than? I mean, you take me through his play so far.
Now, obviously, I say this saying that he is trying to replace two guys who are both in the NFL right now. Zach Wilson with the New York Jets, obviously, and Jaron Hall now with the Minnesota Vikings. So trying to make it essentially three in a row in terms of NFL quarterbacks, that's a pretty lofty status to uphold for him. I think he has been about as good, if not better, than most people thought he was coming in. There's a lot of people that when he came in from Pitt, they looked at what he did at Pitt a year ago and said, "Man, is this guy washed or what?" And that was the concern: is okay, what are you getting? You're getting the USC Kedon Slovis early on in his run with the Trojans that was a dark horse Heisman contender in some people's minds, or are you getting this guy who was seemingly just bumbling around at Pitt a year ago? His points looked very much like the USC type Kedon Slovis during the season, but this past game against this past game that they lost against TCU, it was like, okay, there's the Kedon Slovis from Pitt. So it's been up and down so far this year, but I think all things considered, having gotten BYU to a 4-2 record, especially considering the struggles they've had in the run game, I think he's been better than most people expected.
Let's talk defense a little bit. I think that obviously, TCU had a young quarterback that threw a lot of, for a lot of yards last week. It seems like BYU wants to kind of push their chips to the line of scrimmage and take away the run game. Yeah. TCU able to take advantage of that. You take me through what they do on defense, some names to remember for Texas Tech fans and things like that, and kind of what Texas Tech fans can expect to see Saturday night.
Yeah, sure. I mentioned it's a revamped defense this year, and Jay Hill came in as the defensive coordinator, and him and Kalani Sitake were on Kyle Whittingham's staff at the University of Utah together when they made their jump from the Mountain West to the Pac-12 at the time. And they know this defense. Like they essentially learned at the feet of Kyle Whittingham, and they're trying to implement the same type of defense that Utah has run. And what it is, it's a single high safety look. It can morph between a 4-3 and a 4-2-5. It's got both of those options in it. Against Tech, I would expect to see more of a 4-2-5 look. The one guy I was hoping was going to be back on the field this week, we found out, though, is going to be out for the season, is linebacker Ben Bywater. This is a guy who had back-to-back 100-tackle seasons the last 2 years for BYU, and unfortunately, a shoulder injury and some nerve damage in that shoulder is going to necessitate him having surgeries out for the season. So he was a guy I was going to mention, but along the defensive front, keep an eye on their defensive tackle, Jackson Cravens. This is a guy who is a fifth-year senior, a transfer from Boise State, has been very solid in the middle. And then on the outside, Tyler Batty. He was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Week for Week 3. He's their leading sack artist, a guy who seems to be coming into his own as a defensive end overall this season. And then they've got a pair of very good cornerbacks that came with Jay Hill from Weber State at the FCS level, who are starting this season and have been very good so far. One is Eddie Heckert, a former FCS All-American, and the other is Camden Garrett. And they're both expected to be able to play this week. Camden did not play last week against TCU, and having both those guys on the perimeter to really help lock down opposing wide receivers has given BYU their best success. The problem was when you had Camden Garrett sit last week, it was not as effective on the back end. So that caused a lot of the issues it felt like for BYU against TCU, but it's an attacking defense. You have Jay Hill, who said when he came to BYU, "I refuse to sit back and die death by 1,000 paper cuts." He's not going to be passive. He promised an attacking defense, and you'll see him bring 6 and 7 guys at times on blitzes because he refuses to let quarterbacks get comfortable. The sad part is BYU brought blitzes a week ago and TCU bottled it all up. Their offensive line was absolutely masterful in picking up those blitzes that BYU did throw at them. So BYU's got to find a way to generate some pressure, whoever is Texas Tech's quarterback.
Jake, my last one for you is if fans haven't ever been to Provo before, what can they expect to see in that home environment? And we've heard about what a great atmosphere it is. We've heard, I know about the Cougar Tails, the Bert purchased one of these and all those things, but take me through what fans can expect if they're making the trip up there.
Absolutely beautiful weather. It's mid-October up here. You might see some snow on the tops of the peaks of the Wasatch Mountains, which Lavelle Edwards Stadium sits at the foot of. The mountains are ablaze, as we like to call them. They're a lot of red and gold and yellow with regards to the leaves changing up here. So it should be an absolutely incredible backdrop for Tech fans when they get up here. You mentioned the Cougar Tail. It is homecoming this week for BYU. And for the first time ever, Chris, they're doing a maple bacon donut Cougar Tail. They're going to put bacon on top of what is already 18-inch long maple bar. So you know what? Tech fans are in for a treat. I have literally heard about this, rumors about it for years. It's finally happening in reality. So that'll be fun, but it should be phenomenal weather. It's supposed to be in the low to mid 70s on Saturday. So it's looking like an ideal football Saturday here in Provo.
Hey man, and West Texas people love some bacon.
Well,
so in for a treat.
I think they realized it and said, you know what, let's just do it for this weekend. It should be fun. The picture of it makes it look absolutely incredible. Let me just say this also on the Cougar Tail real quick. I have a hard time finishing just one regular Cougar Tail by myself. It's a lot of donut. Share it amongst a friend or two. Let me just recommend that. So.
Very nice. Okay, you got it, man. You got it. Well, Jake, you were very nice to do this with us, and I hope I educated some of the fans there. I know you've done the same thing for the Texas Tech fans, man, but I appreciate it very much.
All right, let me get a quick word in real quick before, and I want to get some keys to the game from you. We'll get those in just 1 second. First, let's get a word in on our friends over at Jase Medical. They've been working with us for a few months now here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The best part about Jase Medical is they want to help you guys out no matter what the situation is. Obviously, we're all looking at what's going on in the world, unrest in the Middle East, the fires in Lahaina there in Hawaii, hurricanes and tornadoes obviously across the South. It feels like earthquakes and more. They all can lead to supply chain shortages for medications and the inability to get medications in a timely manner. That's where Jase Medical enters the conversation, my friends. They offer customizability for your Jase case with dozens of add-on medications. Choose the medications that best fit you and your family's unique needs. The best part is they are working to expand their medication offerings. In the recent efforts, they've added ivermectin as an option to the Jase case, obviously, to add no matter what you're looking for. They've got the options for you guys. So you have these on hand whenever tragedy or anything else might strike. So go to Jase Medical right now and enter the promo code Locked On at checkout for a $20 discount to your order. That's promo code Locked On at JASEmedical.com to take advantage of that. Now it's all courtesy of your friends at Jase Medical. All right, Chris. So when it comes to Texas Tech, they're 3-4 on the year. In your mind, give me maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 keys for the Texas Tech Red Raiders to come to Provo and get a victory.
Well, I think depending on who plays quarterback, I think the way I would look at this is you've got to do something to help this either an dinged up Baron Morton or a true freshman Jake Strong. And with that, I think your recipe has to be, you have to be able to run it at some level. Like you can't just Taj Brooks and Cameron Valdez, who's the backup. They have to be able to run it at some level just to take the pressure off. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is more of a grinded out field position type game, because last year in Ames, Iowa, they got into one of these. It was 0-degree temperatures, and you won 14-10. You're flipping the field. You're using your punter. You're playing for field position. All these different things. You may get into something similar here. I'm not real sure. It's funny because the next week they beat Oklahoma, I think 59-53. So they, it's like which, but I think they may have to find themselves in a, more of a low scoring, game in the 20s, and you got to take advantage. But with that, your special teams probably need to win their side of things here, which is not going to be easy. Texas Tech special teams have been really good. Last week they were not. Now Kansas State, that's a specialty of theirs, and they made you look bad a little bit. But I think you've had a block punt for a touchdown recently. You've done some different things, something that could maybe swing a close game in your favor. The Red Raiders were 4-0 in one-score games last year. This year, they're 0-3. Okay. So it's just funny that margin for error is just razor thin, and like special teams can kind of tilt it. And I think it needs to do that. The other thing I would say is defensively, You need to keep BYU struggling on their third down, conversions. They've really struggled there. I know last week it was a lot of third and long type scenarios, but that's where this defense gets in trouble, is if they start allowing third downs and you allow BYU to stay on the field and maintain a drive. So third down defense, I would say be able to run it, and then you got to do something on special teams to help out your offense or help out your quarterback. Jake, how about you? What does BYU need to do?
You mentioned the third down situation. BYU allowed Texas Tech to go 12 of 19 on third downs. At one point in that game, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 12 of 16. So it was just the numbers are not favorable. And especially BYU had Texas Tech, by my count, at least 6 times in 3rd and 7 or longer, and they allowed conversions on all 6 of them. It was just brutal to see that. And you also mentioned the offensive side of things. BYU's average third down and to go situation last week against TCU was 3rd and 9. So in many respects, third down is the key for BYU this week. Get yourself into manageable downs and distances when it comes to third down on offense, and then get yourself off the football field as a defense. I don't mean to make it as simple as that for BYU, but it really, last week against TCU, that was the killer for them on both sides of the football. The one other one is BYU, when they have been plus in the turnover margin this season, they're 4-0. So turnovers, huge key for BYU. You mentioned the special teams factor. This could be like a punt off, because Ryan Rico has been very, very good for BYU this year. The place kicking at BYU's got a little bit of a question mark. He's not been really that proven so far this year. But yeah, take care of the football if you're BYU, force a couple of turnovers, and then obviously do your job on third down on both offense and defense. And I think BYU may be in for a bounce back effort.
Yeah, nobody will want to see either guy, but the 2 punters in this game are college level elite. I mean, they are big time. And Austin McNamara, the Red Raider punter, his parents went to BYU.
So Austin McNamara, I'll tell you this. I covered some recruiting back when he was being recruited. I had a conversation with him about interest in BYU, and it didn't work out. Obviously, he's now with the Red Raiders. But I remember him saying that. My parents are both BYU alums. So connections across the board when it comes between the Red Raiders and the Cougars.
You got it. Absolutely, man. Jake, appreciate it, brother.
Absolutely. Well, for Chris, I'm Jake. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech your first listen of the day, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your day whenever you hear and or watch this. And, of course, join us again tomorrow right here on Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech.